Hi, people. Just want to say a few words on the late John Prescott, former Deputy Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and actually he held the record as the longest serving Deputy Prime Minister. It's not a post that is one of the great offices of state, it's more at the discretion of individual premierships. So, for example, you don't see this going back into history to the days of Pitt the Younger or Palmerston or Salisbury. It's a relatively new post, say in the last 40 years. I think actually, unless I'm mistaken, well, I think during the war, Herbert Morrison was sort of de facto deputy along with Clement Attlee to Winston Churchill. And I think Michael Heseltine was Thatcher's deputy, but it's at the discretion of prime ministers. But in the case of Tony Blair, this man was very much his deputy. And I think, it's easy to dismiss John Prescott as sort of a loud kind of character, but I think he was actually smarter than sometimes perception would have. Sometimes the way he communicated, the way he spoke was a bit um, on cosmopolitan, let's put it that way. He was a working class guy from, I was going to say Hull, Prescott in North Wales. Um, Honestly, I think there's some things to admire about John Prescott. This was a guy who was, I believe, true to his principles, and I think that he was a bit rough around the edges sometimes, but he always spoke out in matters of injustice. He was very strong on that. He always spoke his mind. I think there's something to be said for that. Um, and as I think it's unfortunate that he'll always be remembered for that incident where he punched the farmer, and I'll come back to that in a second. But he did dedicate his life to public service. He was behind the Kyoto Protocol, among other things. Of course, there were things that would be controversial. He supported the Iraq War. He was a central figure in the Blair government. The Blair government was deeply divisive for many people. Um, John Prescott very much bridged the Labour left and Labour centrists. I think he was absolutely critical to the New Labour project, which for me was era defining political movement. Um, I think he's an interesting character, and I haven't read this book yet, but I'm looking forward to getting into it. He wasn't perfect. He supposedly had affairs, and he was rough around the edges. But like I say, this was a guy who came from genuinely working class roots. He made his way to the top. Um, Now, unfortunately, what you see in this country when senior politicians pass away, you get a lot of generalized comments on the news videos. Oh, he's just a politician. Who cares? And what did he ever do for us, etc., etc. I get irritated by that sort of closed-mindedness, um, because actually, if people bother looking into someone's record, they'll see that there is a lot there. With Prescott, there were allegations of double standards because, for example, he had two Jaguars whilst he was promoting, sustainability and climate change issues. I guess you could argue that was hypocritical. But I want to address the incident with the farmer. Infamous. Okay, so he was 2001. He was going to an event in Wales, I believe. I don't know all the details of this, but I do know that this man threw an egg at him at close range, and the footage is now famous. Um, in this book, I have read that, so that's quite an interesting picture. Um, in the book, Prescott says that he could feel the yolk of the egg coming down his face, and it was warm. So he genuinely believed it was his own blood. This thing happened really quick. He didn't know what it was, and he lashed out instinctively. And if you see the footage, it's quite rough and ready. Prescott doesn't just punch the man; he kind of like tussles with him, and the guy falls into him, and Prescott almost has him in a headlock. And the other farmers and Prescott security people are pulling him away. Apparently, this wasn't the first such incident. In another event, I think it was in the same year, and Prescott himself admits this. He was at, I think it was the Brit Awards or something like that. A member of Chumbawamba got up on the table that Prescott and his friends were at, and he threw water over them and made this speech about what about the Dockers, what about the Dockers. It was some sort of prank. But this guy soaked Prescott and some women who were with him, and Prescott understandably got angry by this. Um, and he decked the guy. Luckily, the press didn't capture that, but they did capture an angry John Prescott. Apparently, Jerry Halliwell, as in Ginger Spice, personally apologised to Prescott for this so-called prank. I personally think if that was what happened, that's pretty low of Chumbawamba, the Chumbawamba member, to do that. It's borderline assault. A prank is only funny if it's everyone's involved. I think it's anyway. I think he was a character. I think he was a very important figure in New Labour. I have very mixed views on New Labour. Some of the things they've done deserve a lot of scrutiny and condemnation, but I see comments online like he was a traitor to the people. This is, vilification that is unwarranted. I think John Prescott deserves a lot of credit for speaking out on issues of injustice and sometimes taking unpopular opinions. But this was a man who stood up for what he believed in. He went from humble roots to being at the very top of government. There is something to admire about that. Um, so, rest in peace, John Prescott. I'm looking forward to getting into this book. I would say, he was one of the central figures of that New Labour project, along with, of course, Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, Peter Mandelson, and a few others. But definitely, Prescott would have been invaluable to that. I think it does him a disservice to just dismiss him. I think he was actually a deeper person and a more intelligent person than people implied. Just because he had a sort of common way of speaking, I think he could actually be quite thoughtful and quite pretty smart actually. In debates, he always fought things out. He was always a good debater. Um, I think he had weight. I do. So certainly the most colourful politician to come from Hull since William Wilberforce. So rest in peace, John Prescott.